Welcome back. This is All Angles on eNCA. Now, elections are just 2 weeks away, and many are pinning their hopes on their chosen parties to deliver basic service delivery. This while some reports suggest that about 43 municipalities are on the brink of collapse. These are over and above the 87 municipalities already flagged. Political analyst Moeletsi Mbeki says the ANC has abandoned its promise that it made to gain support against the apartheid regime, some of its promises at least. He says the party only seems to serve the interest of the African middle and upper middle classes. He joins me now to unpack it all. Moeletsi Mbeki, thank you for your time. It's good to see you after such a long time.
Thank you.
We were saying off air that we've all been in a bubble of sorts.
Thank you, Tilas. It's great to be here.
And being in the same space. So let's start at the beginning. You were reflecting some time ago on the riots and violence that we saw in July, and you said it points to a certain dynamic playing out in as far as what you're calling the underclass and the capital class. And you were suggesting there that there could be areas of a potential, collaboration between these at least segments of these two classes. What did you mean by that?
Well, the main casualties of the July riots, if we call them that, or July uprisings, others call it that. The president calls it July insurrection, so it has many names. Who were the main casualties? There were two main casualties. The underclass, the people who did the looting, nearly 400 of them were killed during those riots in those few days, and many others injured. So that's the first casualty. The second casualties are the owners of those shopping malls, who are the capitalists in South Africa. So you can see that the way in which this country is governed, which benefits the middle class, the casualties are the owners of capital who lost their property, and the underclass, the unemployed, the poor, who lost their lives. And that is the crisis we sit with. Now, these two groups have to get together to find a way for South Africa to benefit them as well as not just the middle class, but to benefit them as well. So that in future, we don't have this conflict where they end up being the casualties. You have a conflict within the ANC, but the main casualties are the underclass and the capitalists, not the ANC.
And if you talk about finding a way of ensuring that these two classes, the capital class and the underclass, don't find themselves being casualties in this way in future, is there a way? Is there a potential for that? And how would it even begin?
Well, where there is a problem, there has to be a solution. It's very clear that the underclass does not have a political voice in South Africa. It's the middle class who control our politics. The African National Congress, if you wish, the African middle class controls our politics. The capitalist class also don't have a political voice in South Africa. They may have property, they have capital, but they don't have a political voice. So the challenge is, how do these two get together and combine so that they have a political voice in how this country is governed? They are not just at the receiving end of the decisions that are made by the middle classes, but they participate, they have a voice in the decision-making about the economy, which at the end of the day is what drives these conflicts that we see in this country.
And you're saying that one of the things that the riots revealed was that the ANC could not protect capital. Basically, capital had to reckon with the realization that actually we can expect no protection from these people, but rather the ANC, in your reading, now actually represents the African middle and upper middle class?
Yes, for the African middle class and the upper middle class, they lost nothing in those riots. They don't own those shopping malls. So for them, they don't own the shops. So for them, they lost nothing. So they didn't want to make any action that might endanger their political power. For them, the vote and the political power is their primary asset. That is the asset of the African middle class and upper class. So they were not going to do anything that will jeopardize the vote in the coming election. So they told the police, you stand aside and watch what was happening. You watch the people get trampled to death, shot by other defenders of their property, and you watch the property being destroyed. But we don't want to jeopardize. We have an election coming. We don't want to jeopardize our vote, a big part of which, incidentally, comes from the poor who depend on social grants. So they then stood back and allowed the destruction to happen. And now they blame each other. The Minister of Police blames the Minister of something of intelligence, the Minister of Defense blames the President. But the long and the short is they allowed nearly 400 people to be killed, to die in that riot, and they allowed billions and billions of valuable South African property to be destroyed.
Why does it matter to view the developments of the last few months through this prism, Moeletsi Mbeki? The prism of, firstly, an ideological prism. Some would say ideology is dead. Perhaps the ideology of now is pragmatism. You do what works. But you can respond to that. But also looking at it through the property relations and the economic structure in our society. Why does it matter in the post-July context going to the local government elections?
Well, it matters enormously because the economy of South Africa, let's just look at the economy since 1994. The great majority of South Africans fought against the party. Why did they fight against the party? Mainly under the leadership of the ANC. The reason they followed the leadership of the ANC is because the ANC said, this is what we are fighting for. The ANC produced a document called the Freedom Charter. Under that document, they outlined what would be the benefit for all South Africans if we defeat a party. For example, one of the things they said is that after the defeat of apartheid, nobody will go hungry in this country. Today, 40% of South Africans go to bed hungry. That's nearly 30 million people. So the promise which was given has not been kept. Instead, we are exporting food from South Africa, while 40% of the population of South Africa is hungry. So it's in the interests of the ruling elite or the middle class that rules South Africa to have this food exported, because then they can import their luxuries. They import, when you look at the Blue Light Brigade, if you wish, they don't have a single car that's made in South Africa. All the cars that they drive in are imported. Although we have a car industry in South Africa that makes cars, but they want to import. So that's the dynamic that we're sitting with. So it's a power dynamic that we have that is working against the underclass and the poor and against the owners of capital, but it benefits the middle class.
There's then the speech that you delivered at the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber. I think it was in June, where you spoke about, I had never really thought of it this way, that South Africa has been under one kind of nationalism or another continuously since 1910. It's just, the qualifier that comes bore the word nationalism that has changed.
Yes, absolutely. In 1910, if you remember, the British handed over power to the to South African citizens, and this power was taken over by Afrikaner nationalists. In 1994, the Afrikaner nationalists, after a long fight, handed over power to another nationalist party, which was the African National Congress. So since 1910, we have been ruled by these two nationalists. Now, these nationalist movements, what is the core of nationalism? The core of nationalism is grievance. You are aggrieved against somebody else, and therefore you feel you are excluded from the benefits of what exists, and you want to be included. So the Afrikaners, nationalists, said that the British were excluding them, for example, from mining. They were excluding their language from being an official language. English was the official language. So they wanted to be included in the system of the colonial system that the British created. The African nationalists, when they took over in 1994, they wanted to be included also, because they said the Afrikaner nationalists had been excluding them with their apartheid policies. But what they didn't, they didn't want to change the fundamentals of the economy. The economy under that the British established remained the same, under both the Afrikaner nationalists and the African nationalists. And this economy that we inherited as a country from the British favors the middle class and the elite, but disadvantages the mass of the people.
And part of what you then said in that speech as a parting shot to you, Moeletsi Mbeki, was that, and I quote you here, the political changes of the last 27 years have overall impacted negatively on the economy, leading to stagnation and deindustrialization. Basically, this nationalism that you say has continued, only just changed form into African nationalism, has not been good for the economy of the country, with the result being stagnation and deindustrialization. Talk to that, but also tell us what the voter ahead of the 1st of November should be making of all of this conversation you and I have been having the last few minutes.
Well, these are very complex issues, as you can see, Tulas. So the poor voter is faced with this mass of information which he or she doesn't understand. The reality is that, well, the beneficiary of democracy, let's say who benefited from democracy, it is the African middle class who have been the primary beneficiaries of democracy. And how they have benefited, they took over the government, they took over the state, and they got employed in the state, in the public sector, in the state-owned enterprises. And they ratcheted up the salaries for themselves. So that today, the South African public service is the highest paid public service in the world as a percentage of gross domestic product. So 14% of GDP in South Africa goes to pay the public service, which is the core of the African middle class. That's where it goes to. Now, to finance that 14%, you have to tax the production sector. So the production sector can't create jobs because the money it needs to invest is being taxed out and is being consumed by the middle class. So now the voter today is being told by Mr. Middle Class himself, which is President Cyril Ramaphosa. He's telling them, vote for me so I can make another billion. But he doesn't tell them that he will make another billion. He's just telling them, vote for me, I will bring back the Freedom Charter, which I abandoned 27 years ago. But the poor people don't understand this is what is happening to them. There are a great number of them. But a great number of them are very poor, and the government gives them crumbs. and these crumbs are called social grants. So then they are stuck between the rock and the hard place. That's where the voter is.
Moeletsi Mbeki, thank you for coming through and helping us exercise our cerebral faculties on these complex issues. It's important that we always tackle it, as we say on this show, from all angles.
Thank you, Tila. Thanks for having me.
That's political economist there, Moeletsi Mbeki, just sharing some of his thoughts about some of the issues that are perhaps playing in the backdrop, not really in the foreground of some of the political discourse that we see on a daily basis ahead of the elections.